The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association, connecting Virginians to their government. We're pleased to have Ken Plum from the House of Delegates representing Reston and surrounding areas. Welcome.
Woody, it's always a pleasure to be with you, and I thank Virginia Cable Television Association for providing these reports back to our citizens.
Well, thank you for being here. We know how busy it is, especially in this short session, but I understand the town of Reston just turned 50 years old.
50 years old, and the unique thing about it in Virginia is that while we refer to it as a town, it's actually unincorporated. It's really a community built around citizen involvement through a Reston Association of citizen ownership. It's growing wonderfully well. The metro line to Wheelie Station is now open. That adds a whole other dimension to getting in and out of Reston. So it's doing very well, and I will tell you some of the best people in Virginia live in Reston.
Great, that's wonderful. Short session, the pace is frenetic.
Yeah.
But I know you have a lot of legislation that you are pursuing this session that you have pursued in the past. Sure. Trying to create equity. Talk to us about the minimum wage bill you have in.
Yeah, Woody, my concern is that while I'm in a very prosperous part of the state, even in that area there are people who aren't doing well. The economic disparity among those who have and those who don't have has widened over the last couple of decades, and that's of concern to me, and I think of concern to my constituents. We don't want to do well at other people's expense. The amazing thing about the minimum wage, as we call it, is it has been the same wage since 1997.
1997.
1997, and the consequence of that is it's losing purchasing power. In fact, before that, there was a long period of time where the minimum wage hadn't been raised. And if you take a look at the history of the minimum wage, when it had the most purchasing power, you go all the way back to 1968. And if you were to take this 1968 rate and index it to the current day, taking into account inflation and so on, it would be $10 today. So my bill was a very modest bill. It said, let's bring it up to 1010. That, in effect, trues it up to what the purchasing power rate had been, and then let's index it. This January 1, 4.3 million citizens throughout the United States got a raise. And they got a raise because their state, 29 states, had already raised the minimum wage, and 19 of those states had indexed it so that it rose with inflation. But those 4.3 million people, none of them are from Virginia, because we stay with the same old rate. I just don't think that's right for our citizens, that as we have a more prosperous community, that prosperity be shared. Some will say, well, gee, that'll cost jobs. But I suggest to you that if you give people who are living on the margin more money in their paycheck, they'll buy some more food, they'll make their car payments, they'll pay their rent. That money goes back into the economy. Raising the minimum wage is not a job killer, it's a job creator. It puts money into the economy for everybody so that everybody can play a part in the economy. So it's a bill I pursued for some years, and I think that over a period of time there will come to be a recognition, either at the national level, that maybe the minimum wage needs to be increased, or we'll be able to do it at the state level. But it's something I intend to pursue because my citizens who talk to me say it's important to them too.
And that goes hand in hand with your low-income tax credit, does it not?
Exactly. The other way that you can help working people is through the tax credits that are available to low-income taxpayers. What I have sought to do is not only give them a credit, but do as they do at the federal government, that if you don't make enough money to meet those minimum standards, that you actually get a refund. You know, you can work now at the minimum wage, and if you have a couple of kids, you're actually below the poverty level, even though you're getting what's called the minimum wage. The minimum wage is far from being a living wage, and so either correct the wage or recognize through the tax structure that if someone's working with a minimum amount of income, having to meet their obligations and so on, let's not take that money from in a tax form. That only creates more social programs that are designed to help them out. So it becomes a circular thing that I'd like to see us leave more money in the hands of people who have limited income to be able to meet their obligations, either through having a change in the pay structure or a change in the tax structure.
So in other words, citizens wind up paying one way or the other for those who are at the poverty level as a result of the lack of a minimum wage. They may be Medicaid recipients, they may be food stamp recipients, so we pay for it one way or the other.
Well, you know, we're a compassionate nation. We don't leave people starving on the streets, I trust, and we wouldn't want to do that. So when we set up various social programs that supplement people's food, and in Reston we have a variety of wonderful charity organizations, Cornerstones and so on, that provides both emergency homeless shelters as well as transitional housing. When we have programs like that that make up the difference, we recognize that, hey, somehow or other, we're all going to collectively pay for this. And the most efficient way to do that, it seems to me, would be to leave money in the hands of people who have limited income so they can support themselves and we don't have to support them.
You also have some legislation dealing with hate crimes. What's that all about?
Yeah, Woody, you know, a number of years ago I put in the original hate crime bill. And what hate crimes are, those are assault and battery that have been perpetrated against someone because of the color of their skin, their nationality, their gender, or whatever. And it says that if you commit an assault on someone, you can be charged with assault, but you can have a secondary charge as well, and that is that you've done that because of a person's characteristics beyond their control. We don't control our race, our nationality, our religion, and so on. Those are things that religion we control, but the other things we don't control. And so if you are going to pick on someone, if you will, if you're going to commit a crime against them, there ought to be an additional recognition of that in the court system, and so there's an additional fine imposed. We have heard over our Virginia history horrible stories that go all the way back to Ku Klux Klan days and so on, about people picking on other people because of things like race and nationality. We're once again seeing an increase in that. I stay up to date with the Southern Poverty Law Center, and they keep account of the hate crimes that go on throughout the nation and throughout Virginia. And in Virginia, we have, because of my legislation, we actually keep a tally of how many hate crimes there have been. There were 159 last year. People who innocently, who did nothing wrong, are suddenly assaulted by people because they don't like who they are. And I sense that, and that's a 20% increase in Virginia over the previous year. I sense that in the national tone of things, which disappoints me greatly, the tone and temper of our times, that you're going to see more of that go on. And when I looked at the hate crime as we passed it about 15 years ago, back then we were less conscious of people's sexual orientation. So it was not included in the original bill. So what my bill does is to make the Virginia definition compatible with the federal definition, which essentially brings in LGBT issues. We have seen the horrible stories of young people in school bullied and attacked, people on the street attacked, sometimes murdered and so on, because of their sexual orientation. Again, something for which we don't have a choice. The idea that somehow people have a choice in the sexual orientation is an idea that's been disproven a long time ago. And we recognize and have to honor those folks for who they are and make sure that our laws protect those people against arbitrary discrimination, against arbitrary assault and battery and so on. So that's what the hate crime thing is all about. I'm very hopeful that the legislature will see fit to extend the protections that we have extended a long time ago to people, again, for race, nationality, and so on.
I noticed that some of your colleagues on the other side of the aisle have introduced a bill that would make it a hate crime to assault a law enforcement officer, emergency medical personnel, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where does that stand?
Well, I don't know exactly where it stands today, but the concept is right. There's one distinction between what they're doing and what I'm doing, and I would support their legislation steadily. When you choose to be a police officer and so on, you know you're going to be in a dangerous capacity. When you're born of a different nationality, when you're born of a different race, when you have a different religion, when your sexual orientation is different, you don't have a choice in those matters. So if we're going to extend and expand the definition of hate crime, we need to do it, I think, in instances where people, because of their personal characteristics, beyond their control, would suffer hateful actions. It's really quite despicable, some of the incidents that we now see in the press of where these kind of incidents are occurring. And when we see those kind of things occurring, it seems to me it's necessary for the state to step up and say, you know, this is not acceptable action, if this is going to be your public behavior, then you're going to be charged not only with assault and battery, but you're going to be charged with that hate action that you took.
What about firearms? We know there's still a lot of gun violence.
Yeah.
Criminal background checks, I think that's something that you've been pursuing for some time as well.
Woody, it's astonishing to me to realize now that there are more people who die from gun violence than they do, for example, from traffic accidents. That number is like over 30,000 a year now. Now, granted, a lot of those people are suicide victims, but the access to the gun makes it easier for people to make that 1 second decision to take their life. Within a second they may not have done it, but it's a finality to that. You can't turn it back. You can't turn back the clock. But I'm even more concerned about situations where there are these terrorist attacks, and I'm going to call them that. And there are people who will tell you that they're concerned about terrorism. Well, I am too. I'm concerned about domestic terrorism. That is to say, someone who decides one day that they're going to take people's lives for whatever reason. And some of them are hate crime kind of reasons. But currently we have a requirement, as does the federal government, that if you go to a licensed federal firearms dealer, you have to have a background check to determine that you're not a person of violence. You haven't committed felony crimes, or that you are not in a mental state that you would be a danger to yourself or to others. And if you fall into those categories, you can't buy a firearm. And that is not to take away your liberty, it's to protect the public's interests and the public's lives and public safety. So there's a very common sense approach to this that I'm continue to be concerned that we're not able to go forward with in legislation. And that is to say, anytime you purchase a firearm, not just from a licensed dealer, but from an unlicensed dealer who's at a gun show, or someone off the street, you have to have a background check. Again, we're not taking away anybody's guns unless you've shown that you're not a responsible gun owner. If you've already been involved in crime, if you've already been involved in, if you personally are mentally ill, such that you're of a violent nature and you would harm people, then I think we have a responsibility for public safety. It's common sense, it seems to me, and people I talk with seem to agree that it's common sense. But in the legislature, we seem to get hung up on the details about the constitutional right to have a gun. We have a constitutional right to free speech. But if I sit here and slander somebody, they can bring suit against me for doing that, right? Likewise, if you have shown that you're not responsible enough to own a gun, then we ought to say that you have given up your constitutional right in that instance. So I'm continue to push that bill. I will tell you that I've been involved with a lot of good citizens who are really concerned about this issue. You know, it was the 14th of December 3 years ago that the massacre at Sandy Hook Elementary School, where 26 people, 20 of them being little kids in an elementary school, were slaughtered because a guy had free access to a gun. Every 14th of every month in my community, because we live next door to the National Rifle Headquarters, we have a vigil. We do it every month of every year to send a signal that we're not going to forget those kids, that we're going to work to try to make the community safer. And from my perspective, the way you make them safer is you make sure that guns are in the hands of responsible people, not irresponsible people. The other thing I don't like the idea of is that somehow we would then, because of an incident like that, arm a bunch more people with the idea that more people having more guns make you safer. Too many incidents show us that if you pull out your gun to be protecting someone else, the police don't know whether you're the protector or the perpetrator, and you actually end up with an even more unsafe place. So, long story short, I've introduced this bill before. I'm pursuing it again. Happy to have the governor's full backing on this. The governor also is a believer in universal background checks. So I'm hopeful we're going to give it a best shot.
Now, how has the provision in the compromise that was worked out last year between the governor and members of the General Assembly relating to the voluntary aspect of background checks at gun shows? That's if I want to sell a gun at a gun show, I'm not licensed, I can, there are police officials available and I can ask for a background check.
Correct. And that's voluntary.
Right.
It's voluntary, and few people seem to have taken advantage of that. I would suggest to you that the people who are most likely to volunteer to do that are people who are going to pass the test. If you're there and there's an unlicensed dealer selling a gun and you've already committed felonies, you're not likely to volunteer to have your background check. I think it's fine we have it on the books. I think it's fine for those people who take advantage of it, but we should not feel safer because of it, because it still leaves open gaping holes of people being able to buy guns without any background check at all.
Now what about our schools, especially K through 12 and our high schools? I understand that school resource officers may be armed now, and there's a move to expand that and to create another position, a school security officer who would be armed.
Right.
What do you think about that?
Well, I don't think that's a good idea. I don't see the solution to this to be to arm more people. Now, as a practical matter, high schools, being the large institutions that they are, and the diversity of the folks who attend there and so on, typically have, in our county, for example, a relationship with the local police. So there's actually a policeman there. What we know about policemen is that they're trained. They're people who know about the use of weapons and so on, and they have more incidents. The need for a policeman in an elementary or middle school has not been shown. In spite of the incident that occurred at Sandy Hook, there's no evidence to suggest that had someone been there that day that it would necessarily have saved a life. So I don't like the idea that you have young children exposed to the idea that in order to come to school, there's going to be somebody there with a gun to protect them. I think that's a whole wrong thing about our society. And I don't think it's incompatible with what I said before about background checks. I think they serve a good purpose. But the overarming of our community, I just don't see it as a need.
Now, as a former educator, how do you review the significant increase in the use of suspensions in our local school districts?
Well, there's been some studies looking at that, and I'm pleased to say that we're bending that arc back towards a more reasonable look at that. It never made any sense to me that a child who acted out, who showed you that that child was most in need of services, we would take them out of the system. I really am a supporter of alternative programs. In fact, when I worked for Fairfax County Schools, one of the things I did was to start alternative programs for kids who, for whatever reasons, are not able to adapt to the regular school setting. And I will tell you, when you get to know those children, there are a huge number of reasons why they don't make that adaptation. They come from very troubled homes. They circumstances beyond what we would understand how someone would survive. So when they come to school, they don't necessarily act like all the other kids. But the answer to that is not to send them back home. The answer is to figure out what the appropriate programs are that would best meet their needs. And there are ways in which that can be done. And there are ways in which you can allow kids, particularly when they're in the seniors in high schools and so on, to take a furlough for a period of time to get life straightened out and come back again. So I'm a believer in the cutting the pipeline, as we describe it, the pipeline that runs from the school classrooms into the jails, cutting that by intervening with not punishment but treatment. Treatment and adaptation for kids so that they can make it in the real world. They can be successful, they can be productive citizens, they get job training and so on, and not be sent home to smoke cigarettes or watch television or whatever they would do if they were just stuck at home.
In that regard, how important, in your opinion, is early childhood education?
Oh, you know, the research is overwhelming. The research is overwhelming about the significance of early intervention with children. Children come with a lot of circumstances in their lives, in their health as well, that dictates whether or not they're going to be successful in school. If you intervene early, you can in fact turn those instances around, and children can learn to read and so on much more readily. If you don't have that early intervention, and we know this from brain development, if you don't have this early intervention for kids who need intervention, they will not be successful. They won't learn to read by about grade 3, and they won't continue not to learn to read. But intervention with things like Head Start that we're most familiar with, or quality preschool programs, can have those kids grow up and be successful. It's an investment that saves you money. What happens then is you have somebody who can be a productive citizen, who won't need to call upon social services, won't be involved in violence acts and so on. They'll be good, productive citizens.
And so that reading at the grade 3 level, when a child reaches grade 3, is critical.
It's a critical measure. If you don't make it by grade 3, you're going to have a hard time making it at all. And so that's why we have made some investments in Virginia, and candidly, I think we ought to make even more investments in Virginia. It's an investment, not an expenditure. It'll save us money in the long haul if we stay with it.
Now, I understand we have a budget deficit, but the governor has indicated we're going to hold harmless K through 12, at least at the level it's been since what,
Yeah.
2007 or so?
Yeah, they see, and we're always in a budget deficit because our demands are greater than our revenue. And we've made the conscious decision we're not going to raise revenue, and I understand nobody wants to pay more taxes and so on, or most people don't want to pay more taxes. But when you have the demands that we have in public safety, demands that we have in public schools and so on, they don't balance each other out. And right now, the brunt of that is on the backs of teachers. We haven't raised teacher salaries for the longest time, and it's unfair because the rest of society is able to work and get return. I taught school for a few years, and I invite anybody who's a critic of public education to go volunteer for a class or a half a day or a full day, and you'll find out what teaching school is about. It's hard work. The number of children that are in the classrooms tend to be high now because of the number of kids in our community. Class sizes are large. And the diversity of the children who are there, which is beautiful to see, but makes it more difficult for the teachers to deal with, is great. So yes, we have a budget deficit. Yes, we're going to hold firm on public education. But yes, what we need to do in the future is to make sure we can move ahead with preschool education as an investment and with better recognizing the value of our teachers and raising their pay.
I take it that there are a lot of unhappy teachers and other state employees given the fact that there's a deficit, and the governor's proposal would only allow for a one-time bonus.
Yeah, well, see, what happens is this. We say we don't want to raise taxes, even though we've got these government services, and they have a cost. And, you know, for most of these programs, 85–90% of the costs are in the personnel. So we don't have enough money to raise the salaries. So what do we do instead? We, in effect, tax the teachers and the state employees by not giving them a raise. They're the ones who have less pay, not because we didn't raise the taxes that we would have a little less money to spend. We make sure they don't have enough money to spend. And it's really not fair, candidly. Public servants who choose to go into the work of helping others ought to, I think, in my estimation, be rewarded more fully. There are an awful lot of critics around who say things aren't the way they ought to be, schools aren't what they ought to be, and so on. We create that in part ourselves by not adequately supporting the program. So I'm a big supporter of police, firemen, teachers, and public servants. They do great jobs for us. They work under tough circumstances, and we ought to do more to support them, I think.
Now, how have the reforms for the standards of learning gone forth, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, they've been way past due. Over the years, as people have been more critical of the job that the schools have been done, we in the legislature, offering our superior knowledge and so on, kept layering on requirements and requirements and requirements. And pretty soon it became not recognized that, gee whiz, teachers can't carry out their fundamental instruction because they're so busy trying to respond to state standards and state requirements. But children don't seem to be getting any smarter because you test them more, and they don't get any smarter because you test them more. So we have, I think, with parents' insistence, and I give parents credit for bringing to our attention, this is craziness what we're doing. Kids taking 50-some tests and so on to get out of school. That we backed away from that to say, what is a reasonable accountability standard? Because of course we want accountability standards. We want to make sure that the schools are doing what they want to do. But how can we balance that against the fact that kids need to be in the classroom learning, not in the classrooms taking another test? And so that we're truing that up. And the net result is there are going to be fewer tests, and I think more instructional time, and I believe a better package in the end.
Now, I understand that in high school, at least now, there are programs for dual enrollment with our community colleges.
Oh,
and the governor talked about high tech in reference to cybersecurity and the kinds of jobs that are out there for people who are certified in that arena.
Yeah. Woody, I'm so excited as an old educator who's been through the traditional system. I'm so excited about what I see now happening in these transitional programs that are being established between the high schools and community colleges especially. Throughout Virginia, and not just in Northern Virginia, in fact it's more true throughout Virginia than Northern Virginia, we have children getting their high school diploma and their associate degree on the same day. That makes so much sense. I was never a believer in public school that if a bright child started off knowing the subject area content, that you'd have to put them through 180 hours of it. Anyway, what we've come to recognize is that if you already know these things, you can move to the next level. And for a lot of these really bright kids, and we truly have incredibly bright kids in our schools, they can move on to do community college level work. Community colleges recognize that as being their work, so they give the credit and so on. So we have children then being able to move much more quickly into, for example, four-year schools. And the most successful program, I think, in the country, moving children from, and this is young people, from the community college to the university is between Northern Virginia Community College and George Mason University.
And that's the largest university in terms of student body now in the state.
Absolutely. And you make the grade in the community college, you're insured. You will get a slot in George Mason University. And what we found through documentation over the years is that the young people who start at the community college, Northern Virginia Community College, and then move to George Mason, actually have higher grade point averages than people who start at George Mason in the freshman year. These are mature people. They have a sense of purpose. They're motivated and they're hardworking. So it scrambles up what we've thought of as traditional education in the past, but it makes much more sense to recognize the capabilities of our young people as well. Case in point would be this matter of cybersecurity. The number I hear is that there are like 80,000 jobs available, and they're well-paying jobs. They're not menial jobs at all. But the instruction can be given at the community college level, and Northern Virginia Community College has a robust program in cybersecurity. Now, if you want to go on to further engineering and so on, you can do that at George Mason, Virginia Tech, UVA, or whatever. But you can get yourself a really good job. And so if parents are looking to motivate their children who maybe don't want to pursue an academic career, but who want to get job training, take a look at cybersecurity. That's where it's at right these days.
We got about 30 seconds
Yeah.
left, but you've been a leader in terms of redistricting, especially in terms of a nonpartisan commission.
Listen, Woody, we cannot be nonpartisan in putting this process together. We need a nonpartisan district that will do this for us, that will be independent and fair about it. I've been pushing for a commission since 1982. I continue to push for it. It's the right thing to do, and citizens understand that now.
Great. Thank you for being with us, Delegate Ken Plum.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans.